right. Can you hear me? Okay, good morning. My name is Stefán Jökull. I am a senior software engineer at CCP Games. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we defend our players from hackers and how we have evolved account security in EVE Online. To start off, to give you a sort of context, I'm going to tell you a little bit about EVE Online. Hello. There we go. So EVE Online is a sandbox MMO, which means that the game does not set players on a predetermined path. We basically allow them to do whatever they want by themselves. It is a player-driven economy. Most of the items within the game are manufactured and sold by players, between players. And that gives EVE a very PvP-centric feeling. It thrives on the players battling against each other. And it has a high risk versus reward factor in the sense that items can actually be permanently lost within the game or actually taken by other players. Players create and join corporations to play together, like in most online games. But EVE takes this a step further by having a concept of alliances that's used for large-scale warfare within the game. So more facts, EVE launched in May 2003, so it'll be 17 years old this year. It is a single-shared universe, so our players, no matter where they come from, if it's the US, Russia, Australia, they all play together on the same server. And for that reason, around 25,000 players are logged in at any given moment. Now, this is also a big factor in what drives the in-game economy. And EVE also has the Guinness World Record for the single biggest PvP battle in an online game. It has made headline news. Also, one example is the bot path of BR5RB. I constantly forget how to pronounce this, but it gets there. This is a battle where over $300,000, I'm talking real-world dollars worth of items were actually destroyed within the game. So, given this information, it should become apparent to everyone that internet spaceships is serious business. But why do EVE players get hacked? There's really just one primary motivator and drive for it, and that is called RMT, real money trading. This is something that plagues most online games today. It's these shady websites that say like you can, like for World of Warcraft or other game, you can buy 1,000 gold for like $20, and these items are usually gotten by either account hacking or using bots. Almost everything can be bought or sold in the in-game market. That's basically what makes this possible. It's sort of the con of the player-driven economy. And ISK, hello. There we go. Switch to the other clicker then. ISK, the in-game currency, not to be confused with the Icelandic krona, of course, can be directly transferred. But if we start looking at things and how the RMTers operate, we usually see them do one thing. They build account lists, and they use this mostly by using three methods. Credential stuffing attacks. Unfortunately, they continue to work, and they work still to this day because people reuse passwords. They use keyloggers, which are basically pieces of malware that record every keystroke that you make and send it off to some other server, and phishing attempts. We don't see a lot of those, but they happen from time to time. Now, what they do with these accounts is they act on demand. So when RMTers get purchase orders in, they liquidate the accounts from the list as they need them. We've also seen them utilize payment and reward loopholes, for example, utilizing stolen credit cards to buy items. They get them into traffic and liquidate them, or they create bots where they automate some activity within the game without ever having to play it. So we, of course, felt that we needed to do something about this. So in 2008, we created this. It's called the Character Challenge. We call it today the poor man's 2FA because 2FA didn't exist in 2008. So we thought we would ask the users as an extra step when they're logging in to give us a name of a character on their account. Because EVE being a role-playing game, you have to create characters. So we thought that this would be excellent. This is mostly what the players themselves only know. So we would ask them when they log in from a new computer. Hackers would obviously see this and just, I don't know what to do, I'll just bail out and click the cancel button, which of course they didn't. So we started seeing what the hackers actually did to circumvent this. One of the things what they would just guess, they would just use the same login username as the character name, and unfortunately that worked a lot of the time. understandably, because this is a role-playing game, you create character names. Social engineering, they would actually get customer support to tell them, basically saying, hey, I forgot the name of my character, can you please tell me? And this worked for a few days after we released this, for the simple reason that we forgot to tell customer support. Not a good idea, but we fixed that. And then social engineering, they would actually get the actual owner to tell them, and that's, for example, by way of phishing attacks. So, although this wasn't perfect, it did reduce account takeovers. But we started looking at what the actual problem was of RMT. So in 2008, we created PLEX, and the objective there was simply to reduce the demand and return on investment for RMT by simply providing the same service ourselves, legitimately. But we would not want to inflate the in-game economy, so we needed to create an in-game item that could be bought and sold between players to satisfy this demand, but it needed to have some real-world value. We figured that we could just consume it to extend the subscription. So we had an economy-friendly way for a new player to get ISK, the in-game currency. He would be able to buy ISK, sell it to an experienced player, get ISK instead, and that experienced player could then just extend the subscription. And this worked really well. RMT prices on the RMT websites went up, and account hacking went down, simply because we were able to satisfy this demand ourselves. So years passed, and in 2011, we started to introduce the EVE single sign-on. Because over time, new systems got added. We got forums, customer support systems, etc. And we thought that we needed to funnel our login mechanisms to one place. Because as good developers, we don't just want to copy-paste code all over the place. That's what Stack Overflow is for. So we figured we'd go with OAuth 2. OAuth 2 was still in RFC stages. It hasn't become a proper standard back then. The primary driver was token revocation, which is a feature in OAuth 2 where you can actually log the user out of all systems he's logged into. For those of you not familiar with OAuth 2, if you've ever used a mobile application or website that says login with Facebook or login with Google, you click a button, you go to the website, and Facebook says this website wants to log in. That's basically OAuth 2 that you're going through right there. So back then, very few stable implementations existed, so we decided to write our own. Not the best idea, but we didn't really have a choice because this was new. But the immediate benefits were, after we did this, was that we now had one place to focus our security work, which is exceedingly important. And there was a much faster time to delivery on new security features. And one of the first things we did was we implemented login throttling properly. Login throttling is a mitigation for credential stuffing. Credential stuffing is basically when an attacker or a hacker gets a long list of usernames and passwords, he just goes to some applications' login sites and just tries out and see which of them work. Because there are lists out there with hundreds of millions of these combinations, and you do not want to have them be able to try all of them at the same time. So we, after like a few failed attempts, we just simply say, no, sorry, you can't try anymore. We use a few parameters to make this easier, and so it works. We also tweak it so you can't just lock out an IP address permanently. So this is a good way to mitigate these kind of threats. But in 2015, we decided that we would just do proper 2FA. We decided to replace the character challenge because it was annoying. We actually had a lot of real cases where people were coming back after playing for a long time and had actually forgotten the name of their character, so there were customer support tickets involved. So we used email as fallback. A lot of people use text messages. That's fine as well. So if you didn't have access to your mobile device or application, you could just click a link and get the verification code sent to your email address. Now, this was cumbersome for players with many accounts for several reasons. The character challenge was as well, because a lot of EVE players have more than one account. We have people with 5 accounts, even 10 accounts playing. And obviously, like scrolling through your authenticator application, finding the right one when you're logging in 10 accounts is annoying. So adoption wasn't really all that good, but of course, this was better than not having it at all. But in 2016, something interesting happens. EVE goes free to play, which of course means that subscription is no longer required. And that sort of got our heads scratching, because what does that mean for account security? Well, it means that like previously, if we saw someone hacking into an account, like in the sense that they had the correct username and password, they were in many cases not able to log in because the user was subscribed. But now this means that all accounts that might have been compromised with credential stuffing in the past can now log in, so they're now targets. And we also thought about like, what about credential stuffing attacks that we might have missed, because you can actually miss these attacks if they're sneaky enough. So we were very much aware of the fact that there were probably lists out there with usernames and passwords for your accounts, long lists, that would work after the game went free to play and people would be able to log into them. So we tried to think about what you do. One of the ideas that we actually had or thought about was that we would just have everyone go through a password reset process, which would be complete overkill and actually horrible when you're trying to launch a game as free to play, so we didn't do that, but we came up with a solution. We looked at what others were doing, we decided to go with Steam Guard. Now most of you, if you're gamers, you know what Steam Guard is. It's a fact, it's a thing that Steam has that if you're logging in from a new computer, they say we've just sent a verification code to your email address, you have to type that in to continue logging in. And since Steam was using it, we thought, okay, this is good. So step one, we need to demand users have a verified email address. Now this wasn't required before. We had email verification, but it wasn't mandatory. So this was sort of the first bump in the road that we had, that we would need to block people from logging in until they had verified their email address. This has become pretty standard nowadays for a lot of services, so we thought that this wouldn't be a big problem. We needed to clear a list of safe IPs. We had, like, for every user, we had a list of IP addresses that they had successfully logged in from. So if they came from the same IP or geolocation, we would simply not display the prompt, but we were not sure that it was reliable, so we cleared that out just to have everyone go through this process. And then step three, that when they were logging in and they had a verified address, we would send the verification code to their email and they would have to type it in. And at that point, we could then give them either a device cookie or save their address so they wouldn't get prompted again. So we created this beautiful UI. It's actually still there today. It says basically complete login. Please enter the verification code we just sent to your email address. If you do not receive the email within 30 minutes, please contact customer support. So when Eve went free to play, we launched this at the same time. We'd gone through many rounds of testing and we were really happy with it. So what could possibly go wrong there? Obviously, since I'm showing you this, something went wrong. And we didn't really expect this. There was a big change in email sending behavior, which email providers tend to find suspicious. Well, the reason, of course, is that we were sending verification emails, then we were sending another email with the verification codes. And what the big providers like Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, and more do when they see a big change in your behavior is they start delaying your emails for up to 48 hours in this case, which is obviously a problem when you're sending verification codes that are only valid for 30 minutes. Now, we got into contact with these people and said, okay, what can we do? And they basically said, you're going to have to wait. So overall, it took about 2 weeks to get back to normal. So at the same time, we're deploying the game as a free-to-play service. We're deploying new security features. We also had to start working on manual workarounds for customer support. So these were stressful times. But what actually did work, we were really happy when we saw this, that increase in account takeovers was absolutely minimal compared to the increase in logins. And we had a huge increase in logins when we went free-to-play. Also, another benefit was that we now had validated email addresses for all of our active players. And once you have this, you start realizing the importance of this, especially for customer support cases. But what this also meant was that now our players' email addresses became targets because the hackers realized we need to get access to their emails to be able to hack their accounts. So we needed to harden our email change process, basically to prevent account takeovers by changing email address. For example, if you would go to a net cafe or some gaming thing and people would have forgotten to log out, you could go to the account manager website and just change the email, and bam, you've stolen the account. So we now require verification of both the old and the new address before the change is persisted. So now we get to the good stuff. How many of you know what this is? Most of you, right? So Have It Been Pwned is a service that you can use. You can type in your email address and you can see if you've been a victim of data breach. But there's another feature there called pwned passwords. And not many people know about this. I wish more people did. I'm just going to read what it says. It basically says, pwned passwords are 555 million real-world passwords previously exposed in data breaches. This exposure makes them unsuitable for ongoing use, as they are at a much greater risk of being used to take over other accounts. Seems like a perfect fit. So, in May 2018, we integrated this into our SSO. And what we did is, when people are logging in, we check their password using a method called k-anonymity. I'm just going to explain a little bit what it does. We take the SHA-1 is a hashing function of the password. This awesome password, it satisfies all the requirements, 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, symbols, digits. It's great, right? So when we hash this password, we get this sequence, and I'm going to point your attention to the blue and the green parts. When people are logging in, we take the blue part, the prefix, and we do a request to the pwned passwords API. You can actually try out this URL. You will actually get a valid response. So we're not sending the entire password hash, just a very small subset of it. And we get back a line-separated list of suffixes, the green parts. So we go through that list, and if we find the green part in there, we know that this password has been breached at some point. By using this method, we can actually check this without ever giving the actual password away. In this case, we find a line, and if the hash matches, which it does, we can notify the user that his password is insecure. Now you notice a number behind the green part, 52,579. That's the number of times that this particular password has been seen in data breaches. So if you have this password, I highly suggest you go and change it. But to avoid panic, messaging matters, because you do not just want to blurt out that the user is using a hacked password or that his password is insecure, because they might get the feeling that your service is the one that's been hacked. So we display a message to our users trying to explain what's going on. We tell them why their password is insecure. We tell them they should go to the account management website and change it, enable two-factor authentication. And we explain how we came to this conclusion that it was actually insecure. And this message has actually been very well received, which goes to show that if you actually spend the time on educating your users and guiding them, then you can actually increase trust in your service a lot. Just to give you a few statistics on this, around 17 to 9% of logins when we launched this feature had a pwned password. And I actually suspect that our numbers are low compared to a lot of other services because EVE players tend to be security conscious people. Currently, this fluctuates around 9 to 12%. So instead of 1 out of every 6 players having a bad password or an unsafe password, we've gotten this down to around 1 in every 9 or 10. To put this into numbers, in September 2019, we had 245,000 unique logins. Before we launched this feature, that means that at least 40,000 of those would have had an unsecure password. But we can now safely say that at most 30,000 do, depending on which percentage we pick, but we try to be conservative. That means that we have saved at least 10,000 accounts from using an unsecured password just by telling them. We took this a step further. So in 2019, we also collaborated with 1Password to basically give every EVE player a free 6-month trial of 1Password. 1Password is a password manager. Everyone should be using one. It doesn't have to be 1Password. You can just pick whatever works. And at the same time, we decided to improve our two-factor authentication experience as well. So we made 2FA easier for people with more than one account, basically by allowing them to share the authenticator between accounts. Of course, it's not as safe as using a separate one, but it's better than not using it at all, which increased adoption immediately. So when we pulled out the numbers for this, we saw that the percentage of accounts since EVE launched that have two-factor enabled is just 0.7%. But since we introduced 2FA, April 2015, the number jumps to 2.6%. And the big jump is here when we integrated Have It Pwned, but it actually has nothing to do with 2FA, but it's just a method of guiding and educating the users. This number jumps to 5.6%. And the last 3 months, this number jumps to 9.7%, which really puts us in the upper bracket of very similar services out there. So these things are all good. So if I want to summarize these things up, providing a similar service in our case, where we had a service that was being used illegitimately, if we could provide that same service in a legitimate way. That helps a lot. Might not be applicable to you, but it's something to look at. Verified email addresses, incredibly valuable for customer support. Didn't realize it at the time, but we know now. Security training is important. I don't mention that specifically in this talk, but a lot of those things would not have happened if our developers had not had security training. So if you're running a company, software company with developers, I highly suggest that you send them to security training. There are a lot of powerful free tools out there. You don't have to spend a lot of money to increase the security of your applications. Have been Pwned is one of them. It's a free tool. HSTS, CSP, Report URI. I don't talk about them specifically in this talk, but these are built features that are built into every modern browser today that you can take advantage of. You just have to spend development time on using them. And educating and guiding users is one of the best things that we've actually started doing, and I wish more people did. You can save a lot of accounts from being hacked and from being compromised just by educating people on how to create passwords, why they should enable two-factor authentication, and basically how to prevent their credentials from being taken or giving out too much information. And encouraging and incentivizing two-factor authentication is also extremely important. Just telling people to turn it on is not very likely to do a lot because people find it annoying. This is an extra step that you have to do to log in. But if you can incentivize it some way, for example, even if you would just say, like, you get a 5% discount on everything if you've enabled two-factor authentication, people will actually do it. And currently, enabling two-factor authentication is by far, according to a lot of research that's out there, by far the best method to prevent account takeovers. And that does not just apply to Eve, that applies to everything, like emails, Facebook, your corporate accounts, whatever. So 2FA, encouraging, incentivizing, is probably the most important point here. That's my Twitter handle. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. You can probably find me around at the conference after this talk. So please come and chat me up if you want. With that, thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of the conference.